Hello and welcome to the Hypertrophy Odyssey chapter 245. It is the fourth day of the week, aka the Big Bang Attack workout. I am feeling pretty good, a little sore, but we're good to go with a little bit of a warm-up. But anyways, to the main subject matter for today. Divine Intervention Part 2. Yes, the main reason why I wanted to do this one was because I realized while recording Part 1 that there was a lot more that I could have done here in this particular subject matter. So I wanted to just get this out there because this isn't just like one little thing, but I want to kind of go into more stories that you hear, biblical times, those types of things. I probably put something in the thumbnail that has something to do with that, just generally, because I feel like nowadays we get less and less of these stories, but generally speaking, you understand some of these stories. I don't know what are real, what are fake, but who knows? But there are some that we can look into history where all of a sudden we'll see it. But it's also a motif that happens in books, Deus Ex Machina, I believe. If I'm not correct, then Oscar insert something here. If not, I just look like a jackass. But anyways, this is still just something that is a reoccurring thing that happens all the time, I think. And I think I just want to go into more detail about it. Maybe some things like going in the direction of it being a good thing, all of the things that should be happening. I don't know if there's really any examples of it going bad, but then again, I'd have to look into it. This one's going to be more of a researchy one. And also I'm going to probably talk about some subjects or stories that are like, oh yeah, that did happen, or oh yeah, this thing happened, or that thing happened. Because I feel like it's one of those subject matters that I really did just scratch the surface on. I think a lot of people will have more stories or just know of other people that have had these experiences, because it's uncommon, but it is something that is memorable enough that more people will understand and know when that happens, or they'll know something like that happens too. So I want to explore that, maybe some of the more of the spiritual aspects of it, the entire idea of prayer and having it being answered, and it being answered with a lot, those types of things, not just a sign, but a whole other event going on. So that is something that I'm very, very, very curious about. But with that being said, I will see you in Mother Base. All right, so I started this day off with single arm lat pull downs, which were pretty good. But anyways, back to the main subject matter at hand here. Divine Intervention Part 2. So the main reason why I wanted to make this was because while filming this episode, I realized, oh man, I barely scratched the surface when it comes to things like divine interventions and things like that. It seems as though it is one of those subject matters that could probably happen more often than not, have multiple instances in multiple episodes and things that lead into it. I think the subject matter for this one will be a little bit more just looking at older versions of things that are divine intervention. We're gonna touch on a couple of biblical things, like for example, the Bible having multiple things where God intervened, and obviously that would happen in the Bible, of course, but it is interesting that I think a lot of the most famous stories are the ideas from God coming down and bestowing certain things on people, and or being helping them or showing them the way, which is interesting when you look back at something like Moses, like the parting of the sea, but also the 10 Commandments right after, which is interesting that it took what is considered the highest deity of them all in order to show us humans what to do. Even if you aren't a believer of the Old Testament or anything like that, the 10 Commandments relatively are pretty good general bylaws that we should all have and kind of respect. For the most part, I think that it is generally a all right type of rule set that most people can be like, all right, let's not kill each other, and we can use these as those types of things. But it is interesting because these things happen all the time, right place, right time. The person is the wrong place at the wrong time, which does happen. Interestingly enough, I tried to Google when divine intervention goes the opposite direction, but wasn't able to find much. It's very interesting that there aren't that many examples that I could have seen easily with that. But the other way, of course, there are multitudes of examples throughout history, but also just like case by case basis, a little bit more just closer to home, just people having random things that happen to them. but it is an interesting dynamic whenever it happens. Now, of course, this also depends on your level of spirituality, because obviously some people aren't that spiritual, so that they don't believe that these things can happen. Although I feel like there's just some things that are unexplainable, in which case they do happen. I'm not even looking at some things like the Bible, but more so things that happen in the real world that are just too freaky for it to be just happenstance. But it also is interesting to me that it's also a literary device in many books and stories. It is known as Deus Ex Machina, where God saved man from the machine, I believe is what it's supposed to be about. But basically, yeah, there are a lot of movies, famous examples of which do that. One of the bigger ones being Wizard of Oz. It was all a dream. You had the solution the entire time. Another one being Superman, where he can reverse time, which is what, that's a little interesting. There are a few other examples of that in popular movies, but it is interesting that it becomes a literary device, because it is something that there are certain examples of that in real life that, yeah, it just happens. It makes sense. It's not necessarily like, oh, when it happens in a movie, it kind of feels cheap in the sense that they could just kind of get away with anything. But also, it doesn't feel like that in real life. And I wonder what it is about like the cheapening factor of going from media to real life, because in real life, when it happens, it's like, whoa, what? You never really expect it. Or if you do, or if you are going out and praying for it, then it makes you wonder about the connection with spirituality and all of these other things. And is there somebody out there listening to you, and all of those things that go along with that? It's very interesting to go put that all together. But it's just interesting that when it's done in like media and stuff, it always feels like a cop out. And I truly wonder if it's because of the fact that in the media, they take the spirituality aspect out of it, and thus a little more cheapened than it would be in real life. And it's interesting to even see things like now where divine intervention has caused so many things where a couple of inches to the right and we would be looking at a completely different 2024, because things would have been completely different because we would have had a nominee who died. So that would have been very different. And it's crazy because it happened and we just kind of like brushed over it, which is kind of insane because this just happened and it was huge news. Like we were literally inches away from a completely different timeline, which was very interesting to see. So even though it might be something that you think that is like an old timey thing, still happening to this day, probably happening right now as we speak. We're back. Welcome to the workout debriefing. Exercises not filmed. None. Exercises skipped. Well, technically, I skipped the rice bucket training, but I did some other forearm stuff, so it kind of evened out, but not really, not quite, but still. It was just a test run of that thing that I got, but that'll be a different subject for a different day. But anyways, back to the main subject matter at hand here, which is Divine Intervention Part 2. When editing that video today, particularly, I was like, man, there were a lot of things that I could talk about in here that I didn't. So I wanted to take the time on a longer episode to be able to talk about some of those things, because I was like, this is something that is a deeper subject matter, that you can see certain things that have even changed the course of our current history, being such a millimeter or two off to many other things in history, where you have stories that continue this motif over and over again nonstop. And it's just interesting to me personally that you see it nonstop, no matter where you're at, regardless of your faith, really, whether you have it or not. And if you don't, it's very interesting, because then it's like, what did do it? It's just coincidence. But there is no such thing as coincidence. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But this particularly is something that I was like, this could be talked about a little bit more. So I figured, why not make the episode a two-parter, and maybe even more later on, because I feel like there's even more so things that about this subject matter that I can't even really scratch the surface on, because realistically, it's above me. It's above my pay grade. So that is something that I want to delve into more, but that'll be for a future me to deal with. With that being said, though, tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions about this one. This one was more of a random one, but it was a sequel to something that I started. I always like try to finishing off any things like this. But if you have any stories or any other things that you'd like to share that have happened in between these videos, because it's been a little bit since each of them have been released, please let me know in the comments below. Or if you've read anything, please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video with anybody who may or may not like it. I will be back on tomorrow with a new video. Thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I will see you in the next one. Keep it heavy. Stay safe out there. Stay warm. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace!